BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be looking at Ted Mayfield as a D.B. Cooper suspect, reading the John Doe Indictment against D.B. Cooper, and of course continuing with the Cooper Profile, which is all about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com, and I am your host, Box Ned. And as many of you know, in addition to Cooper Friday, there are other segments here on Black Box Online Radio. Yesterday, I launched the first ever segment about the Black Dahlia, the murder of Elizabeth Short from 1947, and of course, more famously, on Mondays, there is a regular segment about the Zodiac Killer. So I would like to let you know that today's episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If the Zodiac case fascinates you, be sure to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery with a unique and interesting perspective. The trilogy is available on Amazon, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite true crime books. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping out Michael by leaving a 5-star review. And I want to begin by saying that the motivation for today's episode is very simple. When I first started Cooper Friday, I began looking at the D.B. Cooper suspects, and I thought, some way, somehow, at one point, I would like to do an individual episode on each and every D.B. Cooper suspect, so I think it's only appropriate to talk about Ted Mayfield. And, I mean, this is going in a different category because, as you can see from the title of this episode, it doesn't just say D.B. Cooper suspect Ted Mayfield. This is the story of Ted Mayfield, and on the previously mentioned Zodiac Killer segment, I started to use the story of for a suspect that I think belongs in somewhat of a different place, and I'm going to explain throughout the duration of the episode. And let's just go for the most basic introduction, and I'm not even going to lie to you guys, this is an AI-generated script on Ted Mayfield. Ted Mayfield was an early suspect in the D.B. Cooper hijacking case. He was a Special Forces veteran, pilot, competitive skydiver, and skydiving instructor. Mayfield was the subject of multiple calls to the FBI shortly after the hijacking, but he also contacted the FBI himself, which the agency viewed as an alibi. He died in 2015 from injuries sustained while working on an airplane. And there's some immediate things that jumped out to me about this story, and as I've read a little bit about Ted Mayfield over the last year and a half, it's my understanding that he actually called in himself to provide information about D.B. Cooper and the skyjacking, and it would go something like this. D.B. Cooper is on the plane. He successfully obtains his $200,000 and 4 parachutes, and that's in Seattle. He's flying from Seattle to Reno. He jumps out into the night, never to be seen or heard from again, right? And then shortly after the skyjacking, this guy Ted Mayfield calls into the FBI saying that he can predict things about the drop zone, as well as making other comments about the D.B. Cooper case, done in the style of predictions. So that put him on the radar because, as somebody who runs a true crime channel talking about a lot of other cases, also about Jack the Ripper and JonBenet Ramsey, and as you just heard about the Black Dahlia, there are lots of people who try to insert themselves into these true crime stories. And are they doing it because they actually know something? Are they doing something because they've actually figured something out? Or are they doing it because they are trying to hide in plain sight? And I've watched a lot of Forensic Files in 48 Hours over the years, Dateline as well. People do things like this. They insert themselves into the story at a very early time because they're trying to hide in plain sight. But let's look, at this immediate description. Pilot, competitive skydiver, and skydiving instructor, Special Forces veteran. Well, that's absolutely the type of person that would commit the Cooper skyjacking, the kind of person who would jump out into the rain, into cloud cover at night, wearing, his suit and raincoat, and with just the money and the parachute, and that's all he has. I mean, we don't know the contents of Cooper's mystery bag, but that's mostly what Cooper has. So this is the type of person that wouldn't be afraid of doing that, someone ex-special forces, also with an aviation background. Here is a detailed breakdown of Ted Mayfield. In the immediate aftermath of the D.B. Cooper hijacking, several individuals contacted the FBI suggesting that Ted Mayfield was the perpetrator. Some claimed he fit the description and he had a criminal record that included stealing an airplane and armed robbery. And this is another thing that we found from looking at the copycats. Real credit to Ryan Burns for everything that he has done and shared about the copycats, is that the people who were copycatting the Cooper skyjacking had aviation backgrounds. Dr. David G. Hubbard talks about this all the time in The Skyjacker, the book that I'll be discussing later on in the end. The people who choose to commit crimes that involve aviation often have aviation backgrounds. Oh my goodness, is that just like an enormous shocker? But that's ultimately something that does come up. So these suspects who don't have aviation backgrounds, I mean, I can just throw that to you as a challenge question. Should we think highly of them? Should we think poorly of them? I mean, some people are going to propose suspects who have never had a single recorded incident of skydiving. Well, I mean, it's not impossible. Maybe they did it and they got lucky. Maybe they didn't, they were a no-pull, and then they just ended up in some crater and they've never been found. What do you think? Let me know. And the FBI stance is that the FBI initially investigated Mayfield, but quickly cleared him from being a suspect from the list. All right, so, I mean, you even heard that the phone calls were part of his alibi, but I really wanted to differentiate between a suspect that can be thought very highly of, as well as one who just had an integral role in the D.B. Cooper saga. So that's when I use the term the story of, because somebody definitely played a role in these investigations, but I often use the term the story of on Black Box Online Radio for suspects who have some type of major problem with their candidacy, if you understand me. Mayfield's alibi. A key factor in Ted Mayfield's clearance was his call to the FBI just hours after the skyjacking, offering to provide a list of local skydivers who might be suspects. The FBI interpreted this as an attempt to create an alibi. That doesn't look like somebody should be cleared. No, that really does look like someone who is trying to do what? Hide in plain sight. Think about what I said at the beginning. Controversy. Despite the FBI's stance, some researchers continue to believe that Ted Mayfield was a viable suspect. Ted Mayfield died in 2015 due to injury sustained while working on a vintage airplane. So it seems like aviation was a very big part of his life. But there are also several articles that have been written about Ted Mayfield and everything associated with his case, and, just talking about all things D.B. Cooper. So let's have a look at some of them now. And there's an article about him on the Oregonian that says, multiple local tipsters pointed at Maverick, high-profile Oregon skydiving instructor Ted Mayfield immediately after the Northwest Airlines hijacking. His daughter Gwen doesn't buy any of the D.B. Cooper theories about her father. I was living in Bellevue at the time with my mother, and the skyjacking was all over the news, she recalled. I've got to call Dad and see what he thinks. I called my father, and he was sitting right at his desk. He told me that the FBI had already called him and was looking at parachutes. Then he said that he had to hang up because the FBI had arrived, and they wanted to go through some of his records. He sounded very casual the whole time. Now, does that sound like someone who had just hijacked an airplane? Yes, absolutely. That sounds like someone who just hijacked an airplane. Because one thing that really went into my thinking about D.B. Cooper was about how sociopathic Cooper was. This is something that I really didn't expect to find, because I told you guys, I talk about stories like the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio. Those stories are filled with sociopathic tendencies, with psychopathic tendencies. But with D.B. Cooper, some guy who got on a plane and just asked for money and parachutes, was he really a sociopath? he definitely had sociopathic tendencies. And, Pat Boland was the first person to reach out to me and just say, you're saying some things that are very lighthearted about D.B. Cooper. The man was a criminal. And if he were, she didn't call him a sociopath, but she called him a criminal. And if that's the case, then, and he did have sociopathic tendencies, he would be able to hide it very, very easily. This is how sociopaths get away with a lot of crime. They are just going to be cool as a cucumber under pressure because they believe in their ability to lie. And this is so far beyond just like he didn't sound like he was under stress or anything like that. For example, if he were questioned by the FBI, he would not show any signs of nervousness, guilt, because he would believe that he had the ability to persuade them with with the way that he could articulate his sentences. And I wasn't the biggest viewer of Criminal Minds. I've actually only seen 2 episodes of that program, but I do remember this one quotation, and even though that's from a fictional TV show, somebody said, "He's a sociopath. He's trying to talk his way out of it." And that is exactly what would happen. But some other evidence that would further support that D.B. Cooper was a sociopath comes from Dr. Todd Grande and his psychological profile, because he's saying no matter what Cooper did on the plane, no matter what Cooper did after the jump, Cooper threatened to kill everyone on the plane if he didn't get his money. That is a sociopathic tendency. Now, was Cooper a clinical psychopath? I'm not able to say that. I don't think anybody is able to say that without examining him. But he threatened to kill everybody. He said, "I have a bomb. This is my bomb. This is what it looks like. And if I don't get $200,000 in 4 parachutes, everybody's going to die." So just because somebody doesn't sound stressed out or something, or somebody's able to put on a convincing act, that doesn't mean that they are incapable of covering up a crime. That doesn't mean that they are actually hiding something. And the reason why I'm spending so much time discussing this is so many people are saying, well, could he have really committed the crime and then gone home and then just got on the phone and sounded like really calm and chill? Yes. Absolutely, people can do this. And some people can do it convincingly. And I almost just want to write a letter to the FBI with very few words and just saying, sometimes you can get fooled by good actors. Because when I read books about psychological profiling, it really doesn't seem like the FBI is in that category. They don't think that they can be fooled by convincing acting jobs. Everybody can be fooled by convincing acting jobs, but that's just my take on the subject. And this is something else that we're going to discuss in the next article, but also here on the Oregonian Post. It says, in 1995, Mayfield was convicted of criminally negligent homicide in the deaths of 2 of his skydiving customers and was sentenced to death he wasn't sentenced to death. He was sentenced to 10 months in jail. He was convicted for negligent homicide for the deaths of 2 skydivers and sentenced to 2 months in jail. Some words got jumbled together there, so please excuse me for that. But I think you can see where this discussion on Mayfield is going. Some people think that because he talked to the FBI so early on that he couldn't have been D.B. Cooper. That isn't really what does it for me. Now, one thing, though, that is a strike against Ted Mayfield in the minds of some is if we just pull up, his most basic information, we're going to see that he was born in 1935. And on the D.B. Cooper Suspects WordPress, they listed a major con against Ted Mayfield is that he was too young for the skyjacking. 1935. And the D.B. Cooper skyjacking occurred in 1971, so he's going to be 35, 36 years old. And some of you guys might not want to hear this. Some of you might think that I'm being unfair, inappropriate, way off the mark, but I don't believe that 36 years old is too young for D.B. Cooper. I mean, someone was just telling me this on a recent episode of Black Box Online Radio, that I'm not good at judging people's ages based on photographs. I think that people look older than they actually look. Well, that would be the exact thing that happened with D.B. Cooper. People thought that this 36-year-old man looked older. And, I tried some of this stuff out with my fiance, showing her the photos, and she thinks the people look even older than I do. Like, she mega hyper ages the age estimations. So people are going to think that someone's going to look older and younger. And if people are going to say that Richard McCoy and Robert Rackstraw who were in their 20s at the time can be viable D.B. Cooper suspects. 36 years old is not too young to have been D.B. Cooper. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section down below. And there is another article that was written about Ted Mayfield over on the Mountain News, of course, and this one was written by Bruce Smith. D.B. Cooper suspect, Ted Mayfield, killed in aviation accident. Longtime D.B. Cooper suspect Ted E. Mayfield was killed on Friday, August 28th of 2015 in an aviation-related accident in his home in Sheridan, Oregon. He was struck on his arm while hand-starting an Air Coupe airplane and died as a result of the injury at the scene. Mayfield was 79 years old. Ted Mayfield was well known in the D.B. Cooper case as a leading suspect in the early days of the investigation. That's another reason why we have the story of Ted Mayfield for this episode, a leading suspect in the early days of the investigation. FBI officials have stated that Mayfield was fingered by at least 6 callers on the night of the hijacking, November 24th, 1971, but was soon cleared from the suspect list. Now, I need to be very clear about some things, and sometimes people can't tell where I stand on the issues. What I think is much more valuable is estimating time from a possible drop zone to get back to his home and make these phone calls. How many hours would he need, as opposed to just saying, well, he didn't seem like he was bothered or nervous or anything like that. Well, he called it in to himself. Was that hiding in plain sight? I mean, those things do not eliminate somebody. Now, if he didn't have enough time to make that from the expected drop zone, that would be so much more valuable. But as far as this issue here about 6 people called in and they said they thought that Ted Mayfield was D.B. Cooper, I would, absolutely. If I knew that he was somebody who was ex-special forces, he was a jumper, he knew all about parachutes, he was a skydiving instructor. Apparently not the best skydiving instructor in the world. It appears that 2 people died from faulty issues associated with his skydiving instructions, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm not making light of that at all. I mean that with seriousness and sincerity. But ultimately, I would suspect this guy from the beginning. Despite the official position, many researchers continue to feel that Mayfield was an important suspect, and his status was re-examined by 2 Portland investigators, Daniel Dvorak and Matt Myers, in 2006. Mayfield's death was quickly reported in the D.B. Cooper chat rooms on the internet, and on Sunday, August 30th, I spoke with Ted Mayfield's daughter Gwen in Sheridan as his family gathered at the home. Gwen confirmed that Ted died from the accident with his airplane, and she gave me details and commentary about the family's interactions. And this is, going to go on to some things that mostly are not associated with the Cooper case. But overall, though, do you think that Ted Mayfield is a strong D.B. Cooper suspect or a weak D.B. Cooper suspect? In terms of profiling, I think that he matches up very, very clearly. Now, part of me also wants to give the FBI some more credit. Even though I just said I would write a scathing 10-sentence or 10-word letter even to the FBI about, being fooled by things, I would still hope that they put in a little bit more effort into this investigation and had some way of confirming that he was at home on the night of the skyjacking, sitting at his desk the way that his daughter reports. So I would really hope that they've actually done something that was thorough enough to eliminate him. Otherwise, that would just be a brilliant twist in the saga where somebody jumps out of the plane with $200,000, and then they hide the money in some place close to their home, and then they just go walk in their own front door, take a shower, just sit down, and they make a call to the FBI. Oh yeah, I was just watching the news. I can offer assistance. So I think that is something that I would really hope that they found something that just could completely eliminate him. But I told you guys that there were going to be other things that were discussed in this episode, and one of them is going to be from the Legal Talk Network that is going to discuss the John Doe indictment that was placed against D.B. Cooper. And I first heard about this on the Cooper Vortex with Darren Schaefer when he was talking about how D.B. Cooper received a John Doe indictment, meaning that even though they don't know D.B. Cooper's identity, he can still be arrested for this crime. Even though it's past the statute of limitations, he can still be apprehended if he is still alive. but the person on the Legal Talk Network is named Mark S. Saeed, who has written this out here. So hijacking certainly was against the law at the time, and now for air piracy, and it's a violation of the Hobbs Act, which deals with aviation and obstructing commerce. It's something like that, but I only recall that it has a 5-year statute of limitations. So actually, in around 1976, there was an indictment obtained from a Portland grand jury in absentia against John Doe, also known as Dan Cooper, and we finally got a copy of the indictment. It was known that an indictment was handed down, but we actually got a written copy of it, and I think for the first time as part of our FOIA lawsuit. And the rumor, from what I've always been told, and frankly, candidly, we haven't been able to confirm this, but it would make sense as to why the FBI kept the case open, and why they kept renewing this indictment, so that he is still within the statute of limitations. So theoretically, if they were able to take custody of someone, that indictment remains open, and he could be prosecuted. Now, okay, that's some very nice legalese. But ultimately, I think it just comes down to exactly what I said. It means that D.B. Cooper can still be taken into custody, he can still be arrested. It's past the statute of limitations, but it's almost a legal maneuver to keep the possibility of arrest and putting someone on trial open. And that's good because, as you know, we've already said in this episode, D.B. Cooper was a criminal. This was illegal, and he may have been turned into a folk hero in the eyes of some, but he was also a domestic terrorist who was just threatening to kill everyone on the plane if he didn't get money. Now, would he have actually followed through with that? I'm so undivided because everything that I thought about D.B. Cooper before I started Cooper Friday was that D.B. Cooper would have been the type of person who probably wouldn't have wanted to kill anyone. Yes, he wanted the money. Yes, he's using the threat of violence to get it, but he would mostly have just been focused with the money. Right now, I'm definitely leaning toward the possibility that Cooper wouldn't have been afraid to do the job, as he called it, and just detonate the bomb, if it were real, hypothetically speaking, because some people are just not in line to go back to prison. They just will try to do certain things to avoid jail time. And that is exactly what we're going to discuss in this next segment here. And welcome to the Cooper Profile here on Black Box Online Radio. I've been ending these D.B. Cooper Friday segments with the Cooper Profile, where I talk about the psychological profiling of skyjackers, mostly going through the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard. And I started with his book, The Skyjacker. His other book was called Winning Back the Skies. And this is one that really wanted to be a groundbreaking book for the world of psychological profiling, because skyjacking started in the mid-20th century, and it was an aspect of the world of criminal psychology that hadn't really been evaluated yet. So Dr. David G. Hubbard wanted to do some trailblazing things with the skyjacker. And in the chapter that I read most recently, it tells the story of a skyjacker named Will. All of the patients and people discussed in these case studies are only referred to by their first name. And Will is really different than a lot of the other people that have been discussed on this Cooper Profile segment. For example, all of the early people that I talked about on Cooper Friday were ones who were not the oldest, not the youngest. They usually came from big families, but they were somewhere in the middle of the birth order. Like they could be the second born, the third born, the fourth born, but if there's a family of 6, they wouldn't be the youngest and they wouldn't be the oldest. Last week, for the first time, I told you about somebody who was the oldest, and now, this week, Will is the youngest. He was the youngest of 5 children. So this just goes to show you, though, that even though there are patterns in psychology, it's not perfect, it's very flexible, it's very malleable. It goes into the social science category for a reason. Just because somebody becomes a skyjacker, it doesn't mean we can immediately go back to their past and say, well, they weren't the oldest in their family or the youngest in their family, therefore we should eliminate D.B. Cooper suspects like that. No, not at all. So when we look at Will, he was born 5th. He's the youngest of 5 children. And also, really in quite contrast to the other observations that were made by Dr. David G. Hubbard, he didn't really have a very abusive childhood. Most of the people that I've talked to you about in this segment had an alcoholic, an abusive father, and a very religious, zealot mother. Those are the terms that are used in the book. But with Will, he really just has a strict father, but he's not an alcoholic or abusive. He's referred to as an authoritarian, but not abusive, and his mother was also. Now, she was a zealot, she was a churchgoer, and she's also being very submissive to her husband, which she claims is for religious reasons. But Will's father was a Catholic, and his mother was a Presbyterian, and Will ended up developing his own type of spirituality, where he began to believe that heaven was just peace of mind, and hell was misery from the outside world. And even though he has this type of spiritual belief, he doesn't really incorporate it too much into his own life and his actions. And he openly stated that he came to this spiritual conclusion because he had a father who was a Catholic and a mother who was a Presbyterian. So he just began to think about religion in a different way. Well, they're married and they're not of the same faith. So he developed his own spiritual thinking. But Will is actually going to just go into a life of crime. This whole thing about looking for a D.B. Cooper suspect that had a squeaky clean record and never did anything wrong. Well, this really goes to show, like a lot of the other skyjackers that I've talked about in this segment, a lot of them have lives of crime. And Will started out actually by forging his report card when he was a kid. And, he would just take the report card, alter the grades and the comments, and he could convincingly fool his parents that his report card was authentic. Will also learned about money from a very young age. He would collect Coke bottles to get deposits, and he would also sell Christmas cards in December. And you might have heard report card, Christmas card, even though this is not stated in the book. I mean, I just made that type of connection because Will would actually go on to experience a life of crime associated with forgery. It almost reminded me of the story of Mark Hoffman, who is the subject of the documentary Murder in the Mormon Church, although Mark Hoffman was perhaps a more expert forger than Will. Mark Hoffman was somebody who could even fool the greatest experts, so he would do things to create problems for himself, so he would have some type of excitement. Fascinating Netflix documentary that they made about him in multiple parts, if all of their information is accurate. You know how sometimes something can be so mainstream that you just have to question it. But in regards to Will's behavior, he turns 18, he joins the Coast Guard, and he actually really does not like taking orders. He does not like being told what to do. And I began to wonder, now wait a second, didn't he have a very strict authoritarian father, and all of a sudden he doesn't like being told what to do? Well, I don't think it was all of a sudden. I think that it was actually something that really bothered him, and he wasn't aware of it for quite some time. So he's in the Coast Guard, and he doesn't want to be there. He can go AWOL, but he doesn't want to do that either. What does he do? He decides that he's going to fake insanity. He's going to pretend to be insane to get out of the Coast Guard. And ultimately, it works at a certain point. So he's a young person who is on his own, and he knows how to pass off, fake report cards and such, and he's gathered a lot of information about forgeries over the years, so he develops a life of crime, and he goes into the world of check fraud, and he just goes around the country, he stays in hotels, and then when he's there, he starts just moving from place to place so they can't track him. This really sounds like the story of Catch Me If You Can, if you will. And I've had Nicole Legg as a guest on the program. She's the co-host of the D.B. Cooper book review on the Cooper Vortex. And she was the one who told me that the Catch Me If You Can guy, Frank Abagnale, actually made up a lot of the stories about his life. And I mean, he was a real con man, but a lot of the things that are featured in the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks are actually things that he just completely fabricated. He was a con man, meaning that he was a liar. He was sitting in jail at the time that a lot of those events should have taken place. And I wonder if he actually read this book, The Skyjacker, Frank Abagnale, because this sounds like the early parts of Catch Me If You Can, going to different places, forging checks, and trying to get some type of just, financial gain, because that's pretty much what he's doing for 5 years. This guy, Will, is trying to just cash bad checks city to city, and he's also spending an enormous amount of time with women. Some of them are prostitutes, but others are just casual dating. So this is another important issue about the psychology of criminals. There's this widely held belief out there that a criminal is a sad, lonely man. The people who commit these crimes, like even D.B. Cooper, people are saying, Cooper was probably somebody who was divorced, his life fell apart, he was a sad, lonely guy, and he did this to restore his broken image. Well, I mean, not necessarily. A lot of these criminals may have had very good social skills. Just last week on Cooper Friday, I was talking to you guys about Jack Covelt as a D.B. Cooper suspect, and he was a con man, very similar to the skyjacker Will. And it's almost as if there's this person who really can be a criminal, be somewhat miserable, right? Misery is the external world, I guess, according to Will. But he does have the ability to meet people. He has good social skills. What did I say about the sociopath? He can talk his way out of it. And after 5 years of being on the run, going around, partying with women, writing bad checks, Will gets caught, and he gets sent to jail. And he is actually visited by his father in prison, and his father's like, "Hey, son, you need to do something with your life." And Will's like, "Okay, I will, Dad." But when Will is in jail, his father passes away, and he is just absolutely devastated by this. He may have thought of his father as an authoritarian and a controlling person, although not an abusive alcoholic like the other skyjackers, but he's devastated. He's genuinely devastated by the passing of his own father, and a lot of this stuff is also featured in the movie Catch Me If You Can. If Frank Abagnale ripped off stories, I would expect that it is this one. I mean, some of that about the father dying and so on. But he gets out of jail, and his father's passed away, so he can't even really prove to his father that he can get his life in order, and Will goes back to a life of crime, and he gets arrested. He gets put in jail, and he is also just someone who is going to be in and out of prison for quite some time. And he is still committing these criminal activities. He tries to fake insanity to get out of prison. He tries to climb up a prison tower and pretend that he can fly by jumping off. And it's all fake. It's all a ruse. He's just acting all the time. He thinks that he can fool anybody with his acting jobs by pretending to be crazy and so on. And he's let out of prison, he's paroled, he gets in trouble again with the law, and now we get to his skyjacking. And this might be the most benign story of skyjacking that I've ever heard. If I understood this, I had to read over this a couple times because I'm just like, am I reading this correctly? He is actually committing a crime while he was out on parole. And they didn't specify what crime it was, but he's with two detectives who are escorting him back to jail, and they're on a plane, and he hands a note to the flight attendant saying that he's going to skyjack the plane. And even though it's obviously something where he wouldn't be able to do anything about it when he's under the supervision of two detectives who are carrying firearms, he did try to skyjack the plane that way, and by his own admission, he was trying to provoke them into shooting him. It's like a way of committing suicide by not actually committing suicide, or I should say a way of attempting suicide without actually attempting it. He wanted to provoke them into shooting him and just trying to do something to stay out of prison. He had spent a lot of time in prison, and he didn't want to go back, and he had just had enough of it. And they didn't do that ultimately, but he was apprehended and injured. And it just seems like this is somebody who is consistently doing things that are against the law because of his own creativity. It's like how when somebody can be a delinquent, they can be creative, and so many people wonder, why aren't they just using their creative tendencies for good reasons? Well, it's because they're cheaters. That's like telling the kid who's cheating in all the games, you're really good at playing the game. No, they're not. They're cheating. And this guy, Will, has just been a cheater his whole life. He cheated on his report card. He lied and forged it. He cheated with bad checks. He lied and forged them. He didn't even fulfill the agreement with his father about going back to school and sorting out his life. He's just a liar and a fraud. And some of them are genuinely tragic. Part of me is just reading the story, and I did feel something for him when his father passed away. So he's apprehended, and then he's actually being interviewed by the psychiatrist as part of Dr. David G. Hubbard's research. And Will was another different type of case because Dr. David G. Hubbard really likes to get into the psychology of dreams. I guess he has every right to. I think it comes from Sigmund Freud and the interpretation of dreams. Perhaps he was a big influence on Dr. Hubbard. But he talks about how Will is one of the few skyjackers who actually had dreams where he was flying. Skyjackers frequently have dreams where they are falling, but not really when they were flying. And Will had a few dreams where he was flying, but he was actually like trying to move his arms, like fluttering, and he was actually trying to just wave his arms in the sky, and he was able to fly in the dream, mind you. But he also had dreams where he was falling and dreams where he was paralyzed. And just as a pure question of curiosity that I would like to throw to you guys, have you ever had the dreams where you have been paralyzed? I definitely have had that. I have had one major falling dream that has stayed with me my entire life, and it really is just something that wasn't like exciting like an airplane, but I fell out of a tree, but I remember it so vividly in the dream, mind you. I really have not had dreams where I've been flying, but I've had so many dreams where I've been paralyzed, where someone has been attacking me and I'm trying to scream for help, but I just can't move my mouth, and someone's been holding me down and strangling me, and I'm trying to move, but I can't. My body's just paralyzed. I've had those types of dreams a lot. And, like, I can see how somebody like Dr. David G. Hubbard is going to try and find all of these patterns associated with dreaming and patterns that are associated with skyjackers. Oh, well, skyjackers tend to dream more about this, and people who are not skyjackers tend to dream more about that. But I'm still not really sure if it's all connected, and I am just so skeptical of this dream psychology stuff. But I told you, malleable, flexible, social science, let's keep exploring. But I would love to know your response to that challenge question. Out of pure curiosity, have you ever had dreams when you've been paralyzed? And ultimately, what do you think about Ted Mayfield as a D.B. Cooper suspect? For me, he goes a lot lower on the list because I said, even though I have some doubts about the FBI's investigation, I think that they could have eliminated him convincingly very early on. What do you think about the John Doe indictment for D.B. Cooper? I think it's brilliant. I think it's a brilliant idea. And what do you think about the dream psychology that I was just talking about? And if you have any additional comments about the skyjacker named Will, I'm not joking, though, about that catch me if you can statement. And I did read some more things about Frank Abagnale after my conversation with Nicole Legg, and she was telling the truth. There were an enormous amount of allegations against him, and people are just saying that he made up a lot of stories that were used in the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. That much seems certifiable, but it really does seem like this story is almost identical to certain parts of Frank Abagnale's story, and I can't verify it 100% or something like that, even if I had, his book and this book side by side. Maybe they just lived similar lives. Maybe they just had some similar experiences. But also, what do you think about anything associated with the psychology of skyjackers? And you guys can tune in on Monday for a new episode about the Zodiac Killer. You can also get the shorts that come out mostly Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio. I also release them on Facebook and Instagram. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And that's all for me now. Until next time.